And now, Virgin Most Powerful Radio is pleased to present Hands-On Apologetics with renowned Catholic author and apologist, Gary Michuta.
And welcome, everybody. Hands-On Apologetics. You have entered into Virgin Most Powerful's Apologetics Dojo. It's great to be with you today. It's Friday, and as you know, here in the dojo, Fridays we do some CrossFit training. We switch our Finding the Fallacy to a propaganda technique. And by the way, today's Finding the Fallacy propaganda technique is the agenda-setting technique. And also, we meet an early church father. Today's early church father, by the way, is a church council, very important church council. And actually, this is kind of fortuitous because given that the Feast of the Immaculate Conception is coming up, it's a council that had a big impact on Marian doctrine. That is the Council of Ephesus. But that's coming up on the other side of the break. What about, this side of the break? What's coming up on the other side of the break? Well, I'm glad you asked because we're going to do some heavy lifting here in the dojo. We're going to have our good friend Pat Flynn come on. Pat, I think, is perhaps one of the brightest new people to come into the church and join us in defending and explaining the faith. As you know, Pat Flynn was an atheist. He became an atheist and a studied atheist. It wasn't just he slipped in after watching some videos on YouTube and just gave up his belief on God. He studied it, and he lost his faith. And it was also through his study that he eventually saw the problems within atheism and came not only to embrace God, but to come into communion with the Catholic Church. So he's a remarkable man. And when he comes on, if you haven't heard Pat Flynn, hold on to your chairs, because this guy is just has a dazzling intellect. And he's going to give us a new apology that he came up with that I think is pretty sound. And it's certainly something that you should be aware of and have in your toolkit. He's going to basically propose an atheist dilemma that either they have to give up their argument, actually their biggest argument, the problem of evil, or basically the cosmological argument. You got to accept one or the other. Either give up one and accept the other, or whatever. I mean, I'll let him explain because I'm doing a terrible job describing it. But it's a very interesting dilemma that he puts together. He'll be coming up on the other side of the break. So got lots of cool stuff in store for us. And lest I forget, let me give my shout out, my hit tip, my yoo-hoo, my solemn greetings to all of you watching live stream on Facebook and YouTube. Hello, everybody. Welcome aboard as I turn my attention over to the social media section of the dojo. Thank you for the emoji explosion, Beth. And thank you, everybody else. Also, I want to welcome all of you listening on radio around the country and also via podcast around the world. Great to have you on board. And, we're one big family here in the dojo. All, here to sharpen our faith, sharpen our intellects, and be able to go out there and share and defend the faith with whomever we meet. Let's see. I should also note if, we are, many of us are stationed in place because of COVID, but that doesn't mean that you can't evangelize. And so, as I'm giving my shout-outs and stuff, I always remind you, please, if you're on social media, you enjoy what you're hearing or watching, please take the time to subscribe, do the thumbs up, do all the other stuff. That helps our visibility and helps our outreach, and it also helps support our programming here at Virgin Most Powerful Radio. So please, smash that subscribe button if you may. Also want to call attention to a special project that I have going on YouTube. I've been kind of throwing this out there from time to time. It's called the Apocrypha Apocalypse Project. If you just type in Apocrypha, Apocalypse in the YouTube search engine, or just type Gary Machuda, it'll probably come up that way as well. You'll check it out. What I did was I opened up a channel, and basically what I'm doing is taking all the information that I did in my research over the last few decades on the issue of the Deuterocanon, why, the 7 books that we have in our Bibles, that Orthodox Bibles that were rejected by Protestants, why they're scripture. And I'm uploading all sorts of cool videos and trying to get all the information out to the public. So it's on YouTube. It's called the Apocrypha Apocalypse. I also have some programs with William Albrecht. Occasionally I do interview people on the subject of the Deuterocanon. It's really cool. The Deuterocanon is probably one of the most important issues you could discuss with a Protestant, because there simply is no answer for why they have the Old Testament canon like they do. Check it out, and please also subscribe, because it's just getting off the ground, and the more subscribers, the better. And by the way, I should also mention we had William Albrecht on the show, and he's going to be uploading some videos in Spanish. There's not a lot of apologetic material on the subject in Spanish, so that also helps out a lot. So please, pass the word around. Tell people we need to start the apocalypse, the unveiling about these books. All right, enough of that. Let's jump to the finding of fallacy. Today's Friday, so it's a propaganda technique, and the propaganda technique is called the agenda setting. Agenda setting means the ability, basically usually in the news media, to influence the importance placed on topics of the public agenda. So if a news item is covered frequently and prominently, the audience will regard that issue as more important. And agenda setting is very, very influential as a propaganda technique, as you can tell, because basically you pick what's going to be on the agenda of the meeting. So if, for example, a news station may want to focus on one aspect of a story while ignoring or downplaying another aspect, you can change the whole tenor of the discussion, or at least how people view the subject, by emphasizing one over the other. So everybody, who is talking to another person to some extent controls the contents of what's given in this propaganda technique. Basically, it does so in order to influence or promote ideas or actions in a way that's not intellectual. It's not arguing from evidence or arguments. It's really a way of distorting the information you have available for decision making. And that's our finding the fallacy, the propaganda technique of agenda setting. All right, let's jump to the Council of Ephesus, which is our Meet the Early Church Father for today. Council of Ephesus met in AD 431. The first and second ecumenical councils of Nicaea in 325 and at Constantinople in 381 had defended the divinity of the Son and the Holy Spirit respectively, and their consubstantiality with the Father. Now the theological explanation progressed into the area of Christology, and it became necessary to define more clearly the relationship between the divine and human natures of Christ. And in developing theology, and as already been explained in the course of presenting various sections, there was a clash between the Antiochians, those Christians in Antioch, and Alexandria, in basically outlining the precise relationship of these two natures. One person that really comes to the fore is Nestorius of Antioch. Nestorius failed to perceive a sufficiently intimate union between the natures of Christ, and though he does speak of one person in Christ, he did in effect hold that Christ, the incarnate Word, is two persons, for he clung to the Aristotelian notion that there can be no nature without a person. He therefore denied that Mary was the Theotokos, the Mother of God, calling her the Christotokos, or Mother of Christ. Cyril's terminology was also defective, and he can speak of Christ as having one nature, as if, in this context, by the nature he meant person. He does nevertheless never nevertheless give a handle to Monophysitism. The problem with Nestorius' theology and his preaching was referred to Rome, where Nestorius was already suspected of having given refuge to the Pelagian Celestius. With Roman decisions going against them, Nestorius invited Emperor Theodosius II to convoke the Third Ecumenical Council, which met in Ephesus on Pentecost in 431. Nestorius arrived at Ephesus with 16 of his suffragans, closely followed by Cyril of Alexandria with 50 of his bishops, and John, the Patriarch of Antioch, who was a sympathizer of Nestorian. He deliberately postponed his arrival. The three papal legates were on its way. They were delayed by storms. So Cyril of Alexandria, under the impression that he himself was a papal representative, opened the council on June 22nd. Over the protest of 68 bishops, Nestorius refused to attend. In the opening session of 153 bishops were present. Nestorius was deposed. And ultimately, more than 200 bishops signed onto the disposition of Nestorius. 4 days later, after the first session, John of Antioch arrived, and also the papal legates eventually came, and they rubber-stamped and approved what was already approved by Cyril when he had presided. And on July 17th, the fifth session of Ephesus deposed and excommunicated John of Antioch. And that is our early church father for today, the Council of Ephesus, where it defines Mary as Mother of God. And coming up next after the break, we have Master Apologist Pat Flynn coming on the show, and we're going to talk about an atheist dilemma. Stay tuned, folks.
Jesus said to the apostles in Luke chapter 10, "Whoever listens to you listens to me, and whoever rejects you rejects me." According to St. Boniface, in her voyage across the ocean of this world, the Church is like a great ship being pounded by the waves of life's different stresses. Our duty is not to abandon ship, but to keep her on course. May our Lord help us remain ever faithful to His Church, to aid and defend her.
Did you know my mom's gonna have a baby?
She is? Will it be a boy? Or will it be a girl?
We don't know yet, but we heard the heartbeat and my dad said this is gonna be someone very special.
You mean like being a president? Or maybe a doctor?
Well, probably maybe like a singer or dancer, I think.
Hello, my name is Marianne Koharski. I'm the director of Pro-Life Across America. We know that every baby is a miracle and has the potential to do great things. If you know someone who is pregnant or in need of alternatives or assistance, or would like to support the work of Pro-Life Across America, please call 1-800-366-7773 or visit our website at prolifeacrossamerica.org. Pro-Life Across America is non-political and totally educational.
Pro-Life Across America, the Billboard people.
This is Terry Barber. I want to thank you for your support here at Virgin Most Powerful Radio. Here's an easy way to do it. If you're going to sell or buy a house, call Real Estate for Life, 877-543-3871, because they're going to get you a Christ-centered agent to purchase your home or to sell your home. And at the close of escrow, a portion of his commission goes right back to Virgin Most Powerful Radio. Call 877-543-3871. Thank you so much for your support.
Now, back to Hands-On Apologetics with Gary Machuda. If you'd like to join the conversation, call 888-526-2151. Here's Gary.
And welcome back, everybody. Hands-On Apologetics. And we're going to talk about atheism and a dilemma that Pat Flynn has come up with, I think, is very, very interesting. Of course, you all know our good friend Pat Flynn. Pat Flynn is the host of the Pat Flynn Show, covers everything from fitness to mental health to business to writing philosophy and theology. He is a best-selling author, philosopher, fitness coach, musician, and entrepreneur. He also expounds on the theory of generalism, a theory acceptable to each and every one of us. You can check out all his great stuff at chroniclesofstrength.com. And Pat Flynn, welcome back to Hands On Apologetics.
I always look forward to it, Gary. Thanks so much for the invite.
Oh, you're welcome. So how are things going in the Flynn household?
Yeah, things are going pretty well. Just trying to get the family to be holy, trying to make us all saints. You know how it goes. Beautiful mass this morning. We're in Wisconsin, beautiful sunny Wisconsin, as the nights grow longer and colder here. So all things considered, with the craziness of 2020, we are doing well. Thanks be to God.
Awesome. Yeah, that's good to hear. Yeah, so Pat, I love this position you have. You gave me a paper that you're putting together, which places a very interesting dilemma for non-believers of either rejecting the problem of evil or accepting the cosmological argument. So I know there's a lot to it. So why don't we begin with the basics and we can work our way from there?
Yeah, we'll sketch the thing out. It's a long paper and it's somewhat technical, so I hope to submit it for publication soon. But whether it gets accepted or not, we'll see. Either way, you'll get a sneak preview here in this episode just for your listeners. So,
sweet.
Sort of a new thing here. I think it's a pretty novel argument. And the idea is this. Yeah, I like to agitate the atheists. That's kind of been my hobby. So. Whenever I can find an opportunity to do that, I indulge myself, sort of a guilty pleasure. And the idea is this, right? So we know that atheists famously like to press the problem of evil. And there's many different versions of the problem of evil. And in fact, I would say that the dilemma that I pose covers all of them. And I evaluate them and critique them in my paper, whether it's a logical problem of evil or an evidential or probabilistic probable problem of evil. They all kind of come down to the same thing, right? That you can't make sense of evil. Either certain types of evil or just any evil or the sheer amount of evil given the existence of God. That's the idea, that evil is absurd given the existence of God. It doesn't make sense. And because it doesn't make sense, we should reject theism or God's existence or something like that, right? That's the idea. People are probably pretty familiar with that. On the other hand, however, we know that one of the more common ways that the skeptic will try to escape the traditional cosmological arguments for God is by a commitment or a sort of summoning up this idea of brute facts. Now, what is a brute fact? Well, a brute fact is something that the atheists will claim can just exist without any explanation, without any reason, without any intelligibility. It's something that it's not something where it has an explanation and we just can't see it. That's not what they mean by a brute fact. A brute fact is something that just is there and that's all, as Bertrand Russell once said it about the universe. It's just there and that's it. No explanation needed. It's radically unintelligible. It doesn't make sense. And the reason they use this objection is because theists will use various principles to drive to the existence of God as the ultimate explanation for why anything exists instead of nothing, right? This is the sort of class of cosmological arguments. And one of these principles is the principle of sufficient reason, which essentially says that everything is intelligible, that there is a sufficient adequate explanation for, anything that exists. Or another way we might phrase it is whatever is has that whereby it is. That's how Jacques Maritain puts it. And the atheist wants to deny the principle of sufficient reason and say, no, some things can just exist without any explanation whatsoever. It's just there and that's it. Things don't need to be fully intelligible. We can just stop at some level of reality and just call it a day. No, that's it. And different atheists will say what maybe that level of reality is. Maybe it's the universe as a whole. Maybe it's just simple. Maybe it's fundamental particles, or maybe it's some ambiguous physical simple or something. That they don't necessarily commit to the same thing. But the general, their general escape hatch is the same among them. This idea of brute facts. And my argument is this, right, is that you can't be so inconsistent. You can't be so picky and choosy about when things need to make sense and when they do not, right? So if your objection from evil is that evil doesn't make sense given the existence of God, and because it doesn't make sense, we have reason to reject God's existence, you then can't turn around and reject the best arguments for God's existence because you're okay with things not making sense, right? This is a terrible inconsistency, right? I would say that it's actually a form of motivated reasoning, it seems. So my dilemma is exactly that, right? That if you're an atheist who finds yourself in the position of both presenting the problem of evil and rejecting traditional arguments for God by thinking that things can exist without adequate explanation or reason, then I'm saying that's unsustainable. You have to make a choice. Either you have to accept God's existence and thus relocate the problem of evil from a philosophical objection to a theological mystery, or you just have to give up the problem of evil. And either way, progress is made, because either way, atheists lose either their best objection to God or their best defense against the best arguments for God. And to me, that's a win-win, no matter how they want to take it.
Yeah, very good. So I think then the question would be, is it necessary that you would end up with brute facts in regards to the cosmological argument? I mean, is that ultimately where every response is based on some sort of appeal to brute facts?
A lot of the most common ones are, and some of the more formidable atheists have sort of rested on that position. So I think maybe we should back up a little bit and say something about the principle of sufficient reason in general, because my project is an ambitious one, and I actually, at the end of the day, I actually do want to say that you should take the position of accepting God's existence based on these arguments and seeing that there actually are good ways to make sense of evil. Right, that evil can be made sense of given God's existence. It doesn't need to be brute, and it's premature to think that it's brute or to think that we can't give a reason for its existence. So not only do I have a dilemma, but I want to say that we should afford an epistemological privileging to God's existence, because if we're committed to intelligibility, which I'm arguing any atheist who wants to object to God's existence from evil is at least implicitly committed to the PSR, that if we are committed to that, then the logical connections, if you will, are much stronger from the PSR to theism, much more clear-cut, much more obvious, that we should favor that we should accept God's existence over any argument claiming that evil doesn't make sense of God's existence. So I'm saying there's a clear asymmetry as well. Like we should definitely favor the cosmological arguments and move the problem of evil to a theological mystery properly considered. Now, whether the atheists will ultimately take that, who knows? But either way, I don't think they can escape the dilemma. But I'm saying if you're going to accept the dilemma, then you should accept this horn of it, right? So the principle of sufficient reason, just a few remarks about that. Why should we think that it's true? I'll give it just a couple quick points. One is it just seems obviously true, right? Let's call this the self-evidence point. We look around for explanations and we typically find them. When we don't find explanations, we don't think that explanations don't exist, right? So there's a homicide or what appears to be a homicide. We don't know exactly who did it. We'd be pretty, unsatisfied with the detective who just went to the homicide scene and decided to pull a Bertrand Russell and say, not everything needs an explanation. Didn't you know? It's just a brute fact. That wouldn't make at least it wouldn't make a very good CSI episode. We don't think. We would say no, just because we don't see the explanation doesn't mean the explanation isn't there. And keep that in mind, because I think that'll come back when we talk a little bit more about evil. Now, the self-evidence, the common sense, this isn't the last word, but I think it's the first word, right? Like this seems like there's a sort of self-evidence built into the PSR. And yes, smart philosophers disagree about that, but smart philosophers talk themselves out of common sense beliefs all the time. Smart philosophers believe crazy things all the time. So just keep that in mind. Next up is, the PSR, the principle of sufficient reason, seems definitely required for all philosophy and science, right? Science is on the hunt for explanations. Philosophers are on the hunt for explanations. If you deny intelligibility, that reality really is intelligible, that there's a causal structure, an explanatory structure to the world, it's hard to see what science is based off of. It's hard to see how science could be reliable, or philosophy, right? Like, especially forensic sciences, where we don't see things immediately in front of us. You know, maybe evolution is why human beings are here, or maybe human beings just popped into existence out of nothing. If brute facts can happen, then that seems just as good an account as evolution, right? But that isn't how science proceeds, right? That isn't how philosophers proceed. We think, no, there must be a reason, there must be an explanation of why human beings are here, or, you know, pick your branch of science, right? So PSR is required for science and philosophy. Let's keep getting stronger and more aggressive here. I think that the PSR allows us to avoid chaos and radical skepticism. If things can just happen for no reason whatsoever, if they can just exist without an adequate basis for their existence, why isn't this happening all the time? Why aren't like two smiling alpacas just magically manifesting right in this conversation, right? The world certainly seems to behave like we would expect if the PSR was true, right? We can go further. If the PSR is false, we seem to fall into a radical skepticism, right? Because maybe I believe the things I do, including about the PSR, because I think I have good reasons to. I think I have, you know, a basis for that, you know, that my cognitive faculties, you know, operate according to a certain intelligible structure and order to reality. But if the PSR is false, maybe I just believe what I do for no reason whatsoever, no explanation whatsoever at all. It's just what I believe. It's a brute fact, in which case I could be and should be radically skeptical of all of my beliefs, including any doubts I have about the principle of sufficient reason. So what I'm saying there is it's sort of self-defeating to even try and deny the principle of sufficient reason. If we don't want to enter into a sort of radical self-defeating skepticism, it seems like we need to be able to say that the principle of sufficient reason is true a priori. That's pretty strong. I think it's a pretty strong defense. So we could go on, you know, with a couple different other lines of support for the PSR, but maybe that's enough to get us started just for this. And what I want to say is, once you accept the PSR, that it's a package deal for God's existence, right? Because explanations are only going to ultimately bottom out in that which exists in a sort of self-explanatory way, that exists in virtue of itself rather than something else, right? That doesn't have to borrow existence or explanations from anything beyond itself. And we can unpack that after the break, but ultimately that's gonna turn out to be the God of classical theism.
All right, we're chatting with Pat Flynn, and stay tuned to hear more about the atheist dilemma. Stay tuned.
A great man once said that evil is powerless if the good are unafraid. Well, you and I have a rendezvous with destiny. We'll preserve for our children this, the last best hope of man on earth, or we'll sentence them to take the last step into 1,000 years of darkness. We're at war with the most dangerous enemy that has ever faced mankind in his long climb from the swamp to the stars. And it's been said, if we lose this war, and in so doing lose this great way of freedom of ours, history will report with the greatest astonishment that those that had the most to lose did the least to prevent it from happening. Well, I think it's high time now that we ask ourselves if we still even know the freedoms that were intended for us by our founding fathers. Every generation of Americans needs to know that freedom exists, not to do what you like, but having the right to do what you ought. You weren't made to fit in, my brothers and sisters. You are born to stand out. Set yourself apart from this corrupt generation. Be saints. God bless you.
If you shop on Amazon.com, there's an easy way to support Virgin Most Powerful Radio. Just visit smile.amazon.com and type in Catholic Resource Center under the desired charity. Now, when you log into your Amazon account and purchase products, a portion of it will automatically go to support Virgin Most Powerful Radio at no cost to you. Thanks in advance for supporting CRC and VMPR, and may God richly bless you and your family.
Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show. And they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow! That's 80%! realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
This is Jesse Romero. You're listening to Hands On Apologetics with Gary Machuda on Virgin Most Powerful Radio.
And welcome back, everybody. Hands On Apologetics. We are chatting with a good friend, Pat Flynn. And yes, we're doing some heavy lifting on Friday, and because we want to blow out the intellectual muscle, so to speak, so I can recoup over the weekend. And before the break, Pat, yeah, you gave a nice, I think, a very strong defense for the principle of sufficient reason. And so let's just take it from there.
Sorry, you broke up just a little bit there, Gary. Could you just repeat that last part?
Yeah, I was just saying that, you just recapped the PSR principle. And so let's move on from there.
Okay, so yeah, let's go PSR to God very quickly. I'll give a quick sketch of how that argument works, and then we'll start to evaluate the problem of evil and then see how the dilemma kicks in. All right, so the principle of sufficient reason is true. We just argued that. And if we take sort of Maritain formulation and say that everything has that whereby it is, either from itself or from another. Now, what do we mean when we say that everything has that whereby it is? What's the causal property we're talking about? Well, we're talking about existence itself, right? We're talking about actual existence or an active existence or esse, as Aquinas would say it. So everything has, we might say, actual existence, either through itself or from another, right? And then the argument from here is this, that not everything can have actual existence from another, otherwise nothing would exist. So something must have actual existence through itself. Now, maybe there's many of those things, maybe there's only one thing, but there has to be at least one thing that has actual existence through itself. So let's support that second premise real quick. Why think that everything can't just have borrowed existence? Why think that this sort of causal chain just can't go on infinitely? Quick argument, right? So not everything can have existence through another, right? I mean, just think of this little thought experiment. Imagine reality in totality. All of everything, whatever that is, the collection of everything real. Could that have existence from something beyond itself? Just think about that for a minute. I'll give you a hint. The answer is no, right? Because when it comes to reality in total, there's nothing beyond it, right? There's absolutely nothing beyond it that could impart existence to it. So reality in total amazingly, it stands independently, right? It can't be caused by anything, because to say that reality in total is caused would have to posit a cause outside of reality, and that's contradictory. That's nonsense, right? So there has to be at least one thing, maybe more, but there has to be at least one thing that sort of has an ability to exist independently, right? And an ability to exist in virtue of what it is, rather than in virtue of something else, in order to satisfy the PSR, is what I'm saying, right? Now, let's just take a Thomistic line and think about what that could be. And here's what I want to say, that whatever exists in virtue of itself, its essence, what it is, has to be pure existence itself, right? So we'll get a little abstract here, but we can spell out the details as we need, right? So what it is its essence has to be identical to existence. This is a sort of famous Thomistic line. Now, why is that, right? Well, think about it, right? So if any part of this thing were different from the active existence existing through itself, if any part of this thing were different from the active existence existing through itself, then that part wouldn't exist through itself. It would have to be caused. And therefore, it just would be a caused thing. It wouldn't be an uncaused reality, right? Now, what are the implications of this? The implications is that this necessary reality, must be a pure active existence through itself. It must be pure actual existence itself, meaning it can have no admixture of actuality and potency. It has to be completely unconditioned, completely uncaused through and through. The word pure is important. Now, for anybody who's familiar with the Thomistic arguments, will note that once you have pure actuality on the table, you can sort of unlock the entire suite of divine attributes. So whatever a purely actual being is, it has to be omnipotent. It has to be responsible for bringing about all other logically possible realities that would derive existence from it. It has to be timeless, spaceless, immaterial, right? It can't move from move from potency to act, for example, which eliminates any temporality or materiality or physicality, right? So I know we've done a full previous episode on that before, Gary, so I just kind of get the sketch out here. But the general idea is that once you have the PSR ineluctably gets you pure actuality. And once you have pure actuality, you have classical theism. That's the big strokes. That's what people need to understand, right? So it's a package deal between the PSR and the existence of God. The PSR gives you classical theism. Does that make sense, Gary? I kind of rushed through a bunch of stuff there, but I want to
makes
give you a chance
perfect
to chime
sense
in.
to me. Yeah.
Right. So then let's talk now about the problem of evil in general. And as I said, earlier, it's really problems of evil that have been proposed, through the centuries, right? It goes back at to, kind of Epicurus, the famous Epicurean paradox. The idea that, if I remember the formulation right, that if God is all powerful, he can create any world he wants. If God is all good, then he would create a world without suffering. But look around. Look around, right? We live in a world where there's a lot of suffering. There's a lot of evil. So what does that mean? Is God not all powerful? Is God not all good? Now, the traditional response to the Epicurean paradox, which has been proposed in various ways through by other contemporary atheists such as J.L. Mackie, or modified in evidential ways by philosophers such as like Rowe, for example, in his famous evidential problem of evil, is the idea always comes down to this: you can't make sense of evil given the existence of God. That's the idea. It's absurd. It's brute, if you will. You can't explain it, right? Either logically or just the sheer amount of it or the types of evils. So we can see that the objection is really one against a sort of intelligibility to evil. Now, I think here it's important to consider some of the traditional responses to this to see that this actually isn't the case, right? It's not true that we're left without any intelligible explanations or potential explanations for evil. So just a few quick things. The first thing to say is that in order to even speak meaningfully about evil, to get the idea of evil off the ground, we already have to have some idea of a moral standard, right? And I think that's an important thing to comprehend. Because when we're talking about evil, we're talking about the way things shouldn't be in an objective sense, or badness too. You could just throw badness in there. And that's very different than saying, I just don't like something, right? Well, that's fine. I don't like a lot of things. I don't like sorbet, for example, but I don't think sorbet is evil. When we say that something's evil or bad, we say that it fails to meet our expectations of the way something should be. So we're already committed to an idea of a moral standard. And what I want to say is, what could that moral standard possibly be aside from the subsistent good itself, which is God, right? Mm-hmm. So there's already a tension for the atheist right off the bat, but that's not my argument. I think that's just worth pointing out. To even make the problem of evil meaningful, I think there's already an implicit commitment to a moral standard that you can't make sense of without God. And once you appreciate that, theism then, because it better predicts a moral standard, actually is a better sense maker of evil than atheism is, because atheism wouldn't predict a moral standard. It wouldn't give you a moral standard. So that's one consideration that's separate from my dilemma, but still worth mentioning. Mm-hmm. The other is that we can just start to reject the various premises of the Epicurean paradox. Yes, God is all powerful. He can create every world he wants, but it doesn't mean he can create contradictions or nonsense. If God's going to create a world of free beings, those beings are of metaphysical necessity going to be fallibly free beings. Only God is the subsistent good itself. Only God is his own rule. Only God is perfect goodness itself. Any other free being that God creates out of metaphysical necessity, it's always going to have to look to a standard beyond itself, right? And it can always not look. It can always not consider the standard. It can always not consider the moral rule. So it's always going to be a creature that is necessarily fallibly free. Now, if God wants to create a world where love is possible, where two wills can be united, he's going to have to create free creatures, right? And if he's going to create free creatures, they're going to necessarily be fallibly free creatures. And so what I'm saying here is that for the possibility of love to attain, it seems like also the possibility of sin will have to attain. Now, somebody might push back as Mackie does and say, well, couldn't God, cause us to do the right things all the time? And I want to say, yeah, he could. But a wise God always governs beings according to their mode of being, right? God, as a general metaphysical rule, and certainly a teaching of the Catholic Church, grace, the grace God gives, it saves natures, right? It doesn't destroy natures. So God works with beings according to their mode of being. He respects their mode of being out of justice to himself, his own creation, his own goodness, his own wisdom, right? So in the same sense that God wouldn't just perform miracles all the time, because that would be nonsense. That wouldn't be in line with God's ordained power. Neither would God just override our fallibility all the time, right? Because that's not working. That too is against God's ordained power. Certainly within his absolute power, but not within his ordained power. Furthermore, we can say that God could have many morally sufficient reasons for allowing evil into the world. I just gave one, which is love. And what could be a better reason than that, right? But we also can believe that from the occurrence of evil, should sin actually happen, that God could draw greater goods out of it, and that the world could be better off on the whole from what God is able to do from the evils that we commit, meaning that we could have a world where there are such things as radical forgiveness, compassion, mercy, empathy, the atonement, the resurrection, the beatific vision. These are supreme goods, infinitely high goods, that the atheist could never sustain the burden of proof to show that God couldn't have morally sufficient reasons for allowing evil and suffering into the world, which goes back to my original point, is that it's just way too quick to say that evil is unintelligible. And just because we don't see the reason for any particular evil, that doesn't mean that we see that there is no reason. And I think that's the critical insight. And in fact, given that God is infinitely higher than us, it's not surprising that we don't see all the reasons. We don't see the reasons behind a lot of things. In fact, we're not omniscient. We don't have God's eye view of things. So given theism, mysteries are to be expected. And so I'm saying it's far too quick to call evil brute. And in fact, I don't think it is brute.
Yeah, very good. We're chatting with Pat Flynn. More to come on the other side of the break. Listen to Hands on Apologetics.
Logan, what has Virgin Most Powerful Radio done for you?
Well, Virgin Most Powerful Radio, I got to say, I've been a listener for about a year now, and it's really helped me grow closer to my faith in the fact that I'm listening and I'm getting unsugar-coated, clear, charity with clarity Catholicism. And it has really helped me even, grow so much deeper in my faith as a young man and discern the priesthood and have a love for Jesus Christ. And this is so seen on the Terry and Jesse show on Virgin Most Powerful, the unsugar-coated, clear truth of our Catholic faith that is so lacking today. It's almost like the Terry and Jesse show. It's the orange juice Catholicism. It's filling things up. I just need to give my shout out, my praise. I'm just so appreciative. It's just really helped me, and I know people want to hear this. It inspires me to want to speak it, and it inspires me to even go as far as discerning the priesthood to think I should speak this. We need to stand up for our beautiful faith. This is the unsugar-coated beauty, and this is just what I've seen on the Terry and Jesse show. I encourage so many listeners to start donating and support this cause. It has just really impacted my life, and I just want to give some praise to it.
In Luke 7, Jesus said, I tell you, her many sins have been forgiven her, because she has been shown great love. According to St. John of the Cross, Christians should always remember that the value of their good works is not based on number and excellence. Their value is based on the love for God that prompts them to do the works. May we always be motivated by true love for God and not worry so much about what we do, but why we do it.
Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show, and they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow, that's 80%. realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE, US 1.
Now, back to Hands-On Apologetics with Gary Machuda. If you'd like to join the conversation, call 888-526-2151. Here's Gary.
And welcome back, everybody. Hands-On Apologetics, and we're chatting with Pat Flynn about the atheist dilemma. And boy, if you haven't heard the earlier segments, you missed a lot. And Pat has already gone through the principle of sufficient reason, and we've been looking at the problem of evil. And Pat, you did a great job showing the problems with the problem of evil. And so where does that leave the atheist?
Right. So what I've been trying to do is to show that there's just an asymmetry here, and showing that there's better reasons to accept the traditional arguments for God's existence, specifically based on the principle of sufficient reason, and I would say other Thomistic insights, that the logical connections there are far stronger, and this argument is much more secure than any arguments are from evil against the existence of God. So that's what I'm trying to show, is that they're definitely not on a par in terms of argumentative force. And the way that the atheist typically tries to avoid the traditional arguments, I think probably if I were to really try and steelman the atheist position, and you say, Pat, give the best defense you can against the traditional arguments for God, I would say it probably is the brute facts, right? I think that this is the best, if not only way, you can get out of these arguments. And I don't think it works, right? I think it leads to radical skepticism, self-defeat, because the PSR is true. However, for this project now, I'm interested in presenting the dilemma, right, which we already sketched out at the beginning. So now that the asymmetry is in place, we can represent the dilemma, and then see if we can force the skeptic to move in a certain direction, right? So if the atheist is committed to the problem of evil, they are committed to things making sense, right? Because the only reason they think the problem of the evil is a serious objection is because they think that evil doesn't make sense on theism, right? However, if they're committed to things making sense, then if everything I've said is just so far is true, then things make a lot more sense on theism than atheism, right? Because you're only going to get a sort of ultimate sense-making picture and satisfy the PSR with pure actuality as the ground of all reality. God, ultimately, the God of classical theism, more specifically. So you should favor that, right? And what you should say is, okay, I don't see what the reason is for every particular instance of evil, but given that I'm a finite, limited being and God is infinitely higher than I am, my default position should be to say, okay, this isn't a very serious philosophical objection. It might be emotionally troubling. This is really more properly considered a theological mystery, right? This is something that I should consider from the perspective of a believer in God, right? Something I should still contemplate, something I should still try to work through, consider various theodicies, perhaps, but it's not something that I seriously need to contemplate anymore as an objection against the existence of God. So now the atheist might respond and say, and try and offer, and I have this in my paper, the idea of an internal critique. And the idea with an internal critique is this: well, it's only on, given your commitments to theism, but not on atheism, right, that we need to make sense of evil, right? So it's just kind of on your particular worldview. Only you need to make sense of evil. But atheists, we don't have a commitment to the PSR like you do. And what I want to say to that is you can't really escape my dilemma. At most, you can move it around, because we could easily respond to the atheist if you're willing to accept brute facts of things not making sense without explanation, then maybe God exists by brute fact. Maybe he's just there and it just happens to turn out. And maybe evil's a brute fact. And it's just a brute fact that God exists and evil exists. What's the problem with that? That seems fine. So it seems like the only way the atheist can avoid the dilemma, I don't think they can, but if they're going to say that we should reject the theistic project because it doesn't make sense, it's still because they have this implicit commitment to the PSR. They're saying we should reject a worldview because things need to make sense. And that's exactly the problem. So I think no matter how you try and take this, you're never going to be able to get out of the dilemma. I think it's a true dilemma, Gary. I really do.
Yeah, I agree.
So there's just really two options I think the atheist can take. They could just say, okay, I'll give up the problem of evil, and that's it. And they could just rest on a sort of brute fact skepticism. Now, I think that that's self-defeating for the reasons we've already talked about. But if we can get the atheist to give up the problem of evil, that's huge progress. I'm happy with that. Right. Or even better, and I think even more reasonably, they could just say, oh yeah, I am engaged in motivated reasoning. I should accept the existence of God. And yes, evil is still worthy of consideration, but you're right. If I'm committed to intelligibility, I should be a theist because this is the better explanatory system by far. And I'll read Eleanor Stump's book on the problem of evil or something like that. But this is now a theological mystery, not a philosophical objection. So like I said, either of those would be progress for the theist. I think that the latter is a more sensible option, but it's always nice to give them room on where they might want to go.
Yeah, I love that because your dilemma is based on a basic insight that I think we're so in the weeds when we're dealing with the problem of evil. We don't realize that the whole premise of the argument is that the conception of God as classical theists understand him is unintelligible. Evil is unintelligible in that system. And once you make that statement, you're using PSR, right? Because obviously if you're saying it's wrong, there has to be something it's wrong against, which is PSR. That there has to be it has to be intelligible.
Yeah, that's exactly it, right? And I think the upshot of this argument of my dilemma is it covers any problem of evil, right? So whether you're taking an evidential problem of evil, whether you're taking the problem of animal suffering, human evil, moral evil, natural evil, all of it. It covers the entire scope, the strict logical problem of evil. And so I guess that's my, maybe I'm being a little bit too ambitious, but I'm trying to hit it right at the root, the root, and show that no matter what, you're committed to this principle, call it principle of intelligibility if you don't want to say the PSR outright. And as soon as you make that commitment, the dilemma kicks in. Yeah.
No, I love it. It's got universal applicability. I mean, it's like no matter what version. Even like you said, like I always understood the problem of evil to be a kind of parasitic critique because it kind of takes the theistic worldview and tries to show it's incoherent. So even if it does that, you still end up having to affirm PSR, which ultimately affirms the existence of God.
Right. And there's other responses to the problem of evil we didn't even have covered that I think the theist has some other really good tools at their disposal, such as the privation account of evil, right? Like we don't believe that evil is some positive thing that God actually creates. Like evil's like the hole in a sock, right? It's something missing that otherwise ought to have been there, right? It's a privation, a do-good gone missing, for example. So in moral evil, we introduce moral evil into the world because we forget to look at the moral rule before we make a particular judgment. So there's a missing of a consideration of a moral rule to a judgment or an act that otherwise should have been there. And that's on us. Like we're solely responsible in the line of evil. God is responsible in the line of good, all positive being. So that's good because then we don't have to we don't need like a sort of causal explanation for evil, because evil doesn't hold any positive ontological status to begin with. So there's another very important metaphysical asymmetry that is, I think, enormously advantageous to the theists in this debate as well. I know we didn't go into much detail on that in this segment, but I think that that's still worth throwing in there.
Oh, sure. Yeah, you remind me of the weight trainer that, like, after you're doing all these reps, they're throwing more weights on the bars for you. Even though you're crying, I'm done. Can't do anymore. But anyway, yeah, fantastic. And where are you going to publish this paper of yours?
Yeah, so I've got a few journals lined up, so we'll see who takes it, right? We'll send it around here. Probably I've got a few people taking one last peek at it now, trying to pressure test it a little bit. So hopefully in the next couple of weeks we'll have it polished up enough to start shipping it around, and we'll see what happens from there. Maybe it'll go just as far as this episode. If so, then I'm always it's fun to engage in the academic world, but I'm all about bringing it to the people. That's where. As far as I'm concerned. So
absolutely.
even if it just goes as far as this conversation, I'm happy with that. Mm-hmm.
Well, definitely let us know when it's published, because we'll let people know how to get the hold of the whole written argument. We got a couple minutes left. I want to talk about your podcast and all the stuff you're doing, especially the Sunday morning school thing and what's been going on.
Yeah, a lot of good stuff. I had an episode, speaking of Problem of Evil, I had an episode go up today with Dr. Matthew Ramage, very, very wise theologian, and we talked about dark passages in the Bible, those Bible difficulties that, especially the new atheist types always like to throw out there. So how to think about those. We gave some general principles of how to approach Bible difficulties, and then we looked at a couple of the more I guess infamous cases and passages. So that was a really good conversation. I've got an episode coming up Sunday on what is the church. Did Christ found a visible hierarchical church? And I talk about the idea of essential unity and why that's critical in the conversation. Got another interview with Dr. Michael Behe coming up on whether Catholics should reconsider intelligent design. Another little pet project of mine. Actually had Dr. Behe debate Dr. Josh Swamidas on my podcast not long ago on that very topic. So that was interesting. So yeah, a lot of fun topics being explored. So if people aren't familiar with my podcast, it's called The Pat Flynn Show, and I do philosophy segments and theology segments. Gary's been a guest on my show a number of times, which is always a treat. And we do some fitness over there, a little bit of this, a little bit of that,
Yeah. So how do people get a hold of your podcast?
Yes. Thank you. That's probably relevant. It's called The Pat Flynn Show, and the humbly and originally named Pat Flynn Show. It's on iTunes, Stitcher, all the usual places. My website is chroniclesofstrength.com, so you can find it there. And I'm starting to upload Gary, you kind of inspired me to do this. Starting to upload more of the podcasts on YouTube as well, so you can see the old ugly mug, along with the annoying voice. So yeah.
You need to be on all the platforms. St. Paul traveled everywhere that he could to get the message out, so we need to do the same virtually.
Absolutely.
So, Pat, thank you so much for coming on. We really appreciate it.
Always a joy. Thank you, Gary.
All right. God bless. That's Pat Flynn, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, check out his stuff, chroniclesofstrength.com. Also his podcast. I mean, just as you can tell, really well thought out, very intellectually solid information. So check it out, folks. Great resource. Man, the hour has flown. Coming up next, Terry and Jesse.
In the 1990s,